Hello, welcome to Podspel. So this is our season finale. We made it, yay! And I have two very, very special guests, both of which I met first by reading their work on the New Play Exchange, which is a site that I'm both a huge supporter of, but also a frequent user. I've read their work, left comments, and then through the majesty of the internet, we became friends. So I did two separate interviews, first with Hannah Langley, and the second with Ricardo Soltero-Brown. Just a little bit about them. Hannah Langley is a playwright, and her mentor Luis Alfaro wrote, Hannah is an agitator who creates modern American mashups of current political movements and romantic comedies about people who don't seem like they should be together. She fits circles into squares and does not care who she annoys in the process. Hannah deconstructs religion and politics in the same play, and she refuses to play by the rules. This makes her very happy. So in part one, here is my interview with Hannah Langley. So Nina Simone said, "You can't help it. An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times." Do you find that to be true in the work that you create or you write?
Yeah, I really do. I think it happens organically for me. I could set out to write a really silly, animated feature about princesses and tigers and lions, and it can turn out to be about class divisions. I think it's all kind of seeps in there, and I think that's true for most of my friends who are also artists, even if they're not trying to comment on the times, they're commenting on the times.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way. I mean, even when I'm approaching a script or I'm figuring out, like, not only how it connects to me, but I'm always trying to figure out, like, what does the play say in today's context, you know?
Yes, totally. I think that's how you have to read it. It's kind of like how rabbis read, like the Torah.
Yeah.
It's always like through the lens of how is this story relevant now? What is it telling me about my now and the moment I'm in? Because obviously knowing the historical context is really important too, like what they meant then, but also how is it relevant to now, and how is it reflecting or not reflecting the truths of today?
Yeah. I feel like it's what makes so many plays, like plays that sort of stand the test of time. Like I always think, like I just saw the National Theater Live production of Angels in America, and I just thought, like, wow, what an incredibly topical play, even though it's coming up to 30 years old.
Oh my God, that's crazy to think that Angels in America is 30 years old. Like, It doesn't even, of course the phone starts ringing.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Go into the other room. But yeah, that's crazy, and it's so true. It's so relevant still, but in different ways.
Yeah.
The way it reflects how we are now, and especially the whole Roy Cohn thing and the Trump connection.
Is there anything specific about the political climate today that has had a direct influence on your writing recently?
Yes, everything. The first play that you read of mine, Losing My Religion, I started writing right when Trump started campaigning.
Oh wow!
And I wrote it I wanted to write before he started campaigning. I was already interested in writing about the Westboro Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
But when he started campaigning, I'm like, oh, this is a play about hate speech, and this is a play about how you, can you and how do you work past these insurmountable prejudices that so many fringe groups, and also now not fringe groups in America, have, are openly and willingly, spilling out vile things every day on Twitter.
Yeah.
And, how can we heal? Can we heal? Can we still talk to these people? If we do, how do we do it? So that was definitely affected this. my other plays have, and now all my plays seem to be focusing more on, like the whole sexual assault situation, the time, like the Me Too movement, and I like one of my plays that were made was definitely, like, I started writing it because I read about the Brock Turner case, and I was so mad. And then it turned into a completely different play in the last year because it needed to be not about this happened, because now that people are talking about it, it's like, of course we know this happened. It's like, what do we do about the aftermath? Like, how do we move past it? Can we move past it? And so I feel like the political climate of today is inescapable in my work, and I think it's the same with everyone else right now. I just feel like if you're writing at least a little split right now, I don't know where you are. I kind of want to visit because it sounds nice, relax.
Yeah.
But
was there a defining moment in your life when making art was going to be your vocation, like when you actively made the decision?
I think when I was around 12 or 13, I decided to show my dad the novel I'd been working on since I was 11, and I kind of was like, I wrote a book. Here it is. And my dad was like, what? And it was kind of funny. It's like, oh, that's cute. But then he realized that I have hundreds of pages of notebook paper that had been written upon, and he was just kind of like, we could try and monetize on this, or at least get you into a good college. And then it became writing, instead of becoming an escape for me, very kind of something that people can do.
Yeah, totally.
As well, right? But so that's I think that was kind of the moment where it was like, oh, this isn't just for me anymore. I want this to be for other people as well. I don't want to just keep it in my room and do this for me.
Was there a moment when that work, when you started noticing it was reflecting current events or things that are going on now?
I think when I was in college, my work started changing to be more socially conscious, because I was changing to be more socially conscious, because I was a very sheltered child. I come from a very conservative background, so most of my stories were pretty weak, because they didn't have a lot of conflict. It was just we're going on a fun adventure right now. There is really no lesson to be learned or personal growth to be had. It's just we're bored, and we're suburban bored children who want to go on adventures. And then in college, it was kind of oh, the world is a very big, scary place, and it's full of things that, wrongs that need to be righted, that I had no vocabulary for. I always knew those things were happening, and some of those things were happening to me, but I wasn't even aware.
Yeah.
At the time, because just my perspective. So I think college is definitely the place where that changed, and just having really good people in my circle telling me their stories and asking me really good questions, and changing my mind about things, or opening my eyes to things that I would have never seen on my own because of just how I was raised.
Yeah. Kind of tying into that, we're seeing, at least in these past midterms, a broader educational background getting into politics. There were several scientists and teachers and people from more creative backgrounds getting into politics, and even some winning their elections and taking office. Do you think there's value in incorporating even more political science majors into a political atmosphere?
Oh, totally. I think it's kind of the same way I feel about actors and writers, and it's the same way I feel about politicians. I feel like people who do more than one thing and have more than one thing to bring to the table are always the better, or at least not necessarily better, but they have a very strong voice because they're not just doing politics, also have a science background, and they're bringing that into the room with them to help them make better decisions and perspectives that like a poli-sci major would never have, because they just don't know about that perspective. Like, my favorite actors that I've ever worked with were not theater majors.
Yeah.
They were bringing like their history background into that play in some weird way. It was adding so much more than someone who just like has read the entire works of William Shakespeare. That's no hate on people, because I'm one of those people. And like a diversity of perspective in the room.
Yeah.
Like, because everyone's a poli-sci major, everyone read the same book. They might have slightly different opinions, but they're all coming from the same mental framework.
Yeah.
Whereas a scientist or a teacher, or, you know, anyone really that isn't doing that all day, every day, in their academic life and their professional life is going to have a fresh take on things. And that's always going to be helpful.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Yeah, I feel the same way when I'm working on shows, like, you know, because, you know, you're not always getting lucky enough to do a contract show or working with equity actors, but I feel like even in those instances, you're making something that's even more novel than if you were, because you have people who might not be full-time actors or might not be able to live off of their creativity. So you're getting someone with a fresh perspective, not only on the art, but also on life, because they have so many different facets going on at the same time.
Yeah, because they just it's so different, and it really helps it.
Yeah. Do you think there are any distinctly American artistic values?
I guess with American artistic values, I think that there is much personality based, because even like, especially in Los Angeles theater scene of name and face recognition in leading roles. Mm-hmm. And that's because that's who the theaters are choosing to get butts and seats. Understandable. So there's that, and I think there's a lot of like art disappearing into their work instead of just being themselves or being ourselves within the work instead of disappearing into the world. And I even feel that in my writing. I feel like you can definitely see me, you know, if you knew me, see me in all my plays, and it's almost a little too much sometimes.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's a very American thing, where it's like, this is so personal and about the person who's creating the work. Whereas I think in other pieces, it's a little bit more about like disappearing into it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. When does, especially looking at like, you know, this stuff with like Jim Acosta getting cut out of the press room in the White House, and seeing the doctored videos the White House is sharing about the interaction between Acosta and Trump, do you think there's ever a moment artistically when a form of artistic expression becomes propaganda?
That's a hard question, and I feel like, because the point of art is to try and change, in my opinion, is to try and open people's minds and give them options of how, like, give them new options about how to think about things that they may not have known about in story form. But I do think a lot of theater, especially that I've seen lately, has been verging on, this is the one way to think about things. Mm-hmm. You should think this way. And I don't think that's propaganda, because I think that's just taking a strong stance on it, but I think that it can be pushed that way. But I also think because theater is so, like, temporary, it would really be hard to make theater, like, propagandized theater. Mm-hmm. Because you'd have to be seeing it over and over and over again.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas nobody can afford to, like, I can barely afford to see a show a month.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Seeing the same exact message over and over again, I think is pretty impossible in the theater. So I'm not sure if theater can ever be propaganda. I know there was an agitprop, and there still is like a history of agitprop plays, like short plays that people will do outside for free for the masses to make a point.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I just think it's so ephemeral. Like, you can't, it's not something you can take home and hang up in your room. So I don't think theater can be propaganda. But I do think that clips that you can watch over and over and over again and then tweet out on YouTube could be.
Yeah. And so my last question for you is sort of tying everything together, but what does it mean to be an artist in America today?
To me, to be an artist in America, I think you need to be aware. I mean, I guess there's two ways to think about this question. What does it mean to be an artist in America, which is kind of like, what is your truth as an artist in America, or what should the truth be, right? Because there's like an ideal, and then there's the reality. And like, for me, I think I'm working towards the ideal of being an artist in America is just trying to do less harm than good at all times, trying to listen to other people but hold them accountable when I know something's wrong, and then also trying to be there for other people, especially other artists, because it is so hard in a country that doesn't value art, in a culture that is trying to devalue art and expertise and science all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we need to be there for each other, and I think sometimes it turns into a competitive thing because there's so little room and so little space as far as money goes in the theater or in art in general. But I think the key to being an artist and being a good one is being supportive and being there for each other, because no one else is going to do that for us.
Yeah.
We're in that kind of a time.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like we in the arts are sort of, at least I feel at least from my perspective, is like I'm trying to bring about this idea of connection and coming together, but then like in our own profession, we're fighting against like the scarcity complex, you know?
Right, exactly. And it's really, really detrimental. And I want like this generation of playwrights and actors and artists and like devisers, I want all of us to feel like there's enough room for all of us.
Yeah.
We just have to make this space.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like, the success of your friend is not your failure.
Yeah.
And even the success of your enemy is not your failure, because again, there's enough space.
Yeah.
It's just about finding it and making it a priority.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I love that. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you too. It's so great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again to Hannah Langley. Now on to part 2. Part 2 is my interview with Ricardo Soltero-Brown, who is a playwright, actor, and director. A little bit about him. His plays have been performed and read at Valencia College, Rollins College, University of South Florida, Horizon Theater Company, Dixon Place, Actors Express, RHCR Theater Company, the Orlando International Fringe Festival, and more, and he's won several awards, and is published in the Louisville Review and the Dionysian. Here's my interview with Ricardo Soltero-Brown. So Christian Dior is quoted as saying, "By being natural and sincere, one often can create revolutions without having sought them." How do you feel about that quote when it comes to what we are experiencing today in regards to truth and sincerity?
Well, you know, that reminds me, I don't want to steer too off track, but that reminds me of something Marsha Norman said, which was, take your plays and perform them in a cafe, and eventually you'll develop a following. And what connects those two for me is if that sincerity is there, time tells us that people will respond. I think one of the more prevalent examples of that on display in our culture right now is news media, press. There is a great deal of what would you call it? Team playing.
Yeah.
And it gets complicated because there's a sort of objective stance that one can take, and then there's obviously a lot of people who just like to subscribe to their preconceived notions or or what makes them feel good.
Yeah.
And so that to me is really kind of at the big example right now is press, which is and how funny is that we're talking about truth and sincerity, that it would be the First Amendment.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really keeping up with that Jim Acosta situation, being banned from the White House press room. And the situation has become so volatile that even Fox News has come out in support of Acosta and CNN. And I'm starting to wonder if this battle for what's true and what's false or fake news or whatever's going on in terms of the political and media climate in regards to what's real, I feel like sincerity and truth is going to start coming out ahead when we see these kinds of situations where two big media connections like Fox News and CNN, who have been sort of pitted against each other based on people's beliefs, are now starting to come together to go, hey, I think we actually have some common ground that we're willing to stand up for.
Yeah, I mean, it's really dramatic because it's ethereal. It's not tangible, it's not it's not a thing you can hold in your hand. It's people have a deep reaction to it, especially, I mean, maybe not at first, but eventually everyone starts to crack or ooze.
Yeah, totally. Where do you think the truth, in quotations, truth fits into making of art, or particularly what we do in the theater?
Well, I definitely believe that truth, that art must have an element of truth in it, whether it's in its depiction of whatever its subject is. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a journey, say in dramatic art, or form in a painting, there's something about it that makes somebody go, that's not what it is, but that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And it makes it instills a sense of completion in a way, some sort of an acknowledgement of experience.
Yeah. Was there a moment for you, particularly when you were younger, where there was a defining moment in your relationship to making art?
Yeah, there was. In high school, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and then I figured I could, and I started adapting the movie script into a play. And while I was doing that, I realized how much I loved the dialogue. Yeah. And that was it. I knew that's what I was going to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Looking at this year politically, was there any event or events that happened this particular year, or even the last 2 years, that have had a direct influence on your work?
Yeah, several. I'm a contributor to a couple of projects. One is called Protest Plays Project, and another one called Code Red Playwrights. And they collect short plays, sketches, or about certain political issues, social issues, and so I've written 6 or 7 of those throughout the year. But I just finished a play about a marriage comedy that I had wanted to sort of do for a long time, and the couple is the drama is that one is really upset with how obsessed that's how the character puts it, how obsessively the other is politically conscious, that there's no room for anything else. And that sort of came about naturally as I was writing it, about the sort of hysteria, or the you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
It's not been quite like that, and the marriage turns out to be I think a pretty good metaphor, because we're all part of this country. Whether you like it or not, there's people here who you disagree with. And you can go away, you can go somewhere else, but I certainly don't plan to right now.
Yeah. I keep thinking of like how I keep having these I guess echoes of like Alfred Jarry or Brecht coming into like what I see in the news, like events that are happening in the news, and I kind of see echoes of these theatrical writers or moments that we learn in like theater history. And I'm starting to wonder, particularly with seeing works like Building the Wall coming out, like Robert Schenken's new works, and even stuff that Lynn Nottage has been coming out with recently.
Yeah.
How do you think work created or inspired by headlines or current events influences in positive or negative ways, like ideological movements?
I think it depends on the writing. I think Lynn Nottage is a good example, because it's not. It allows room for how do you put it, mistakes and ugly behavior, and Lynn Nottage is a good example, because it shows how connected political activity in the country is with domestic activity.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to that sort of that breaking point that someone might have.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing to depict. We can learn from that. Just because that's the great thing about dramatic art, is that just because a character fails at something or does something misguided, and then sure, a lot of the time learns from it, but can also not learn from it. Mm-hmm. And we, the audience, can recognize that.
Yeah. And I'm speaking of Lynn Nottage, she did this forum basically with Oscar Eustis and Chelsea Clinton in regards to her new play, or most recent produced play in New York that was about the ivory trade. And I remember when I was watching it thinking, wow, like seeing these three people have such an incredibly deep and thoughtful and sophisticated conversation about art, and also this ivory trade industry, and seeing how the arts not only are such great learning tools, but such great exercises in empathy and understanding into other really complicated events or situations going on in the world. And I started wondering if we as an industry are moving back into a more sophisticated political mainstream theater, particularly with the success of like Sweat and Paula Vogel's Indecent, and seeing the revival of Angels in America, and looking at how straight plays are getting back to this kind of early 1900s like more complex dialogues and more complex content, and musicals, I don't know where they're going yet in terms of a mainstream effect because of all the movie remakes and stuff. Do you feel that that's the case? Like we're maybe getting back to theater being a forum for political discourse?
I think that there are plenty of excellent examples of that occurring. I know I'm a couple years late, but I just read Susan Laurie Parks' Father Comes Home from the War.
Yeah.
And that second act is really something, because the Confederate soldier pretty much owns it, the whole second act. And of course I can see through his argument, but she does a really fascinating job of having him explain what slavery means to him.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that that we don't want to shy away from, because I think being sticking to, you know, what you want to hear doesn't really give any sort of reference point.
Yeah.
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 Building the Wall is a funny situation, because it's you know, it was sort of a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
That we saw really sort of take place.
Yeah, and seeing this this historical fiction set in the future, and how so much of it seems possible, at least to me it does, and how scary that is. And I'm wondering if, you know, I'm being a huge Robert Schenken fan that I am, and just being such a steadfast study of his work, I'm wondering if that play came out a little too early, but if it comes out, if they do some sort of major revival or do some sort of major productions, or even see it take off in the regional settings, of how that play could potentially influence the next 2 years of our politics, particularly seeing the way Trump is steering things into some situations that could really develop into what Schenken was writing about.
That's hard to really comment on, because art is so it's bound with time.
Yeah.
It just because something came out, you know, quote, too early or too late, or, you know, there's no telling. There's just no telling.
Do you think there are any speaking of like Building the Wall, which is touching on like American morals and values in some places of the play, are there any? Do you think there are any distinctly American artistic values that we have in the theater?
Values?
Yeah.
I don't know about values. I know themes. I'd certainly say there are themes, and so I guess the values would be an interest in representing those themes.
What themes do you think are you talking about?
I'm talking about shame is a big one, I think. which stems from disillusionment and failure. It seems to be, for me, a recurring theme in dramatic works, whether it's divorce or, the nuclear family, the American dream, capitalism. There seems to be a great deal of things that don't work out here the way I was told.
Yeah, I agree.
But there's not to sound too lofty, but I think ingenuity is another one. I think that comes from the melting pot, as it were.
Yeah. And my last question is, what does it mean, in your opinion, to be an artist in America today?
That reminds me of a story Martin Short told, because he's from Canada, and he came from the second city.
Yeah.
It was, and he said that when he got to America, I think he went to Chicago or something, I'm not sure, but he noticed a difference between the comedians in Canada and the comedians in America and the US. And in Canada, they were focused a lot on character work, and in the US, all the material was political. And I think it's just something we can't get away from, and maybe that's just how it is.
Yeah.
I enjoy a romantic comedy like anybody else, but there are issues here that have been stewing and boiling over, really, for almost 300 years. So, and they're everywhere. You see it every day. At least I do. There are bubbles, as like they say, but I don't know. If you take a walk on the sidewalk, you can see it clearly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Shea.
Yeah, thanks for having this conversation.
I appreciate it.
Well, that's the end of season 1. Thank you all so much for listening, liking, sharing, commenting, and please keep it coming. We will not have any new episodes until the new year, but with that, I'd like to thank our guests this season, Cesar Reyes, Stephanie Lutz, Ricardo Soltero-Brown, and Hannah Langley. I'd also like to thank our producers at Wolf and Thunder Productions. And as we're all getting towards the new year, please feel free to continue liking, subscribing, sharing at Podspel on Instagram and Twitter, liking us on Facebook, and going ahead and leaving us comments or reviews or suggestions on what you might want to hear next season. Thank you so much. Day by day, create, and create for the good of creating. See you next year.